Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. I never thought I'd be telling this story out loud, but it's one of those moments that kept replaying in my head until I realized it was too strange, too emotional, and too unforgettable not to share. Everything started on an ordinary night in a quiet house, the kind where the ticking of the clock sounds louder than your own thoughts. I was half asleep, drifting between dreams and reality, when something made me stir. That's when I noticed it. My stepdad was standing in my room, watching me. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with questions. Why was he there? What was going through his head? Was I imagining it, or was it really happening? The dim light from the hallway outlined his figure, and the silence between us was almost suffocating. I wanted to say something, to break the tension, but the words caught in my throat. My heart pounded so loud I was afraid he could hear it. In that split second, I wasn't sure if I should pretend to stay asleep or confront him. The confusion, the fear, and yes, even the curiosity, blended into something I still can't fully explain. It was as if time froze, leaving me caught in a moment I wasn't prepared for. Growing up, I always thought of him as the steady figure in the background, the one who kept things calm whenever the world felt messy. But that night shifted something. It blurred lines I never expected to cross, and I couldn't stop questioning everything I thought I knew. Was there something deeper behind his presence? Or was it just a strange accident, a misunderstanding that my restless mind twisted into something more? The truth is, the way he looked at me lingered. It wasn't the blank stare of someone lost in thought. It felt intentional, heavy, like he was holding back something he couldn't say out loud. I remember clutching the blanket tighter, trying to make sense of what I was feeling. And the hardest part to admit is this: I didn't just feel fear. There was something else, something I didn't expect from myself, a spark I tried to push away but couldn't ignore. That night became the beginning of a story I never planned to write, but it happened anyway. A story about blurred boundaries, complicated emotions, and choices that would change everything between us. Looking back, I still wonder, was it fate pushing me into a secret I wasn't ready for, or was it a mistake waiting to unravel? I remember lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling long after he walked away. Sleep was impossible. My thoughts were louder than the quiet house, circling around what I had just seen. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to convince myself it was nothing more than him checking if I was okay. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. Something about the way he stood there, the way he lingered, made me realize this wasn't a simple accident. The next morning, everything felt different. The kitchen smelled of coffee, the sunlight came in just the same, but the air between us was heavier. My stepdad sat at the table reading the paper, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. I studied him quietly, trying to catch a sign, a glance, anything that would confirm what I saw. He looked calm, almost too calm, and that only made my curiosity stronger. Was he hiding something? Or was I just imagining it all in my head? Growing up with him in my life was never complicated. He wasn't the kind of man who talked too much, but his presence always felt steady, dependable. He stepped into our lives when I was old enough to understand what it meant to have someone new around, but young enough to still need a guiding hand. Over the years, I had gotten used to his quiet way of showing care, fixing things around the house, making sure I was safe when I went out, asking small questions that showed he was paying attention even when he didn't say much. But now, after that night, all of those little things started to feel different. I caught myself noticing him in ways I hadn't before. The way he carried himself, the way his eyes sometimes lingered too long before looking away, the way his voice lowered whenever he spoke to me in private. It was as if something had always been there, waiting, and I was only just starting to see it. I didn't bring up what happened. I didn't have the courage to. But the silence between us felt like its own secret. Every glance carried weight, every word carried double meaning. When he asked how I slept, my heart skipped in a way I couldn't explain. It was as if we were dancing around something unspoken, both of us knowing, but neither of us daring to say it out loud. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder, was this wrong, or was it simply unexpected? The line between those two questions blurred the more I thought about it. I found myself replaying that night over and over, not just out of confusion, but because part of me wanted to understand what he felt in that moment. Did he see me the same way I had begun to see him? The days that followed only deepened the mystery. Small things stood out, like the way his gaze would soften when I entered the room, or the way his voice carried a quiet warmth when he said my name. None of it was enough to call obvious, but it was enough to stir something inside me. The kind of feeling you try to ignore, but can't. I started to wonder if anyone else noticed, or if it was something only I could feel. Was this a secret connection building between us, invisible to the rest of the world? Or was I just reading too much into every little detail because of that one night? Whatever the answer, I knew one thing for sure. The tension wasn't going away. It was growing stronger, day by day, pulling me closer to something I didn't fully understand. And as much as I told myself not to, I couldn't help but imagine what would happen if either of us finally stopped pretending. But I wasn't ready to face it yet. And I don't think he was either. That left us caught in a strange middle ground, half denial, half longing, waiting for the next moment to push us closer to the truth neither of us was saying out loud. And that moment came sooner than I expected. The shift between us grew harder to ignore as days turned into weeks. On the surface, life carried on normally, me going about my routine, him keeping up with his calm, steady presence. But underneath, there was an unspoken current running between us. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was there, pulling at me in ways I couldn't shake. The memory of that night kept replaying, and no matter how much I told myself to let it go, I couldn't. The quiet looks, the hesitations, the moments where his eyes met mine and neither of us looked away fast enough, all of it made me question where this was heading. One evening, I found myself sitting on the porch while the sun set. The orange light spread across the yard, and for a moment, I let myself breathe. Then I heard the door open behind me. He stepped out, coffee mug in hand, and without saying much, he sat down beside me. The silence stretched between us, and though nothing was said, it felt like everything was being said. I caught myself noticing the little things again, the way his voice softened when he finally spoke, asking if I was all right, or the way he leaned just slightly closer as if drawn by something he couldn't resist. I wanted to ask him about that night. I wanted answers. But every time the words formed in my head, my heart would race and fear would hold me back. What if I was wrong? What if I ruined everything by speaking out loud what was better left unsaid? At the same time, I couldn't ignore the possibility that maybe he was waiting for me to break the silence first. That thought alone made me restless, caught between fear and curiosity. In the middle of all this, there were other things happening too, small distractions that kept life moving forward. My mom had been busy with work, often coming home late, which only made the moments with him feel more noticeable. The house felt quieter, more intimate, as though it belonged only to us when she wasn't around. Sometimes I wondered if he noticed that too, or if it was just me drawing connections that weren't really there. At the same time, I began noticing changes in myself. I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and realize I was paying more attention to how I looked around him, even when I told myself not to. I tried to hide it, to convince myself it was nothing, but deep down I knew it wasn't. The truth was, part of me wanted to be seen, wanted to know if he felt the same pull I did. The conflict grew heavier each day, the push and pull between what felt safe and what felt dangerously close to something more. I couldn't tell if it was wrong, or if it was just complicated. That line blurred every time he smiled at me a little longer than necessary, or when our hands brushed accidentally and neither of us moved away right away. Looking back, I think the scariest part wasn't what had already happened. It was what hadn't happened yet. The uncertainty of when the next unplanned moment would arrive. The suspense of not knowing whether we were both holding back from something inevitable or holding on to a fragile balance that could break at any second. The tension between us had grown into something almost tangible. It was in the way the air felt heavier when we were alone in the same room, in the way silence no longer felt empty but charged with something unsaid. Every small interaction seemed to carry weight, and I couldn't tell if it was only me feeling it or if he was fighting the same inner pull. The longer we left it unspoken, the stronger it became, like a storm gathering in the distance, waiting for the moment to break. One night, everything came dangerously close to unraveling. The house was quiet again, my mom working late, and it was just the two of us. I was in the living room, flipping through channels, trying to distract myself. Then I sensed it, the familiar presence of him standing in the doorway. I looked up, and his eyes caught mine. There was no smile this time, no easy way out. Just silence, thick and overwhelming, holding us both in place. I felt my chest tighten, my pulse racing faster than I could control. He walked over, slower than usual, as though every step carried hesitation and decision all at once. He sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his arm near mine. Neither of us spoke, but the silence was louder than any words we could have said. It was the kind of silence that begged for something to happen, yet terrified us both of what that might mean. I could feel his eyes on me, even when I tried to look away. And when I finally glanced back, it was there, the same look I had seen that night in my room. A look that wasn't accidental, a look that held more meaning than either of us dared to admit. My breath caught in my throat. The room seemed smaller, the space between us thinner, and the pull stronger than ever. Inside, I battled with myself. One side screamed to break away, to keep everything safe and untouched. The other side whispered to stay, to let this moment finally show us the truth we'd both been avoiding. It was like standing at the edge of something I couldn't see the bottom of, knowing one step forward would change everything forever. Just when I thought the silence between us was about to shatter, the front door opened. My mom's voice echoed from the hallway, casual and tired from a long day at work. In an instant, the atmosphere in the room changed. He shifted slightly, leaning back, his face returning to that familiar calmness he always wore. I sat frozen, my heart still racing, trying to hide the storm of emotions running through me. To her, everything probably looked normal, me watching TV, him sitting nearby, but we both knew how close things had come to changing forever. That interruption should have given me relief, but instead, it left me restless. What would have happened if she hadn't walked in just then? The unanswered question gnawed at me. Every time I replayed the moment, it felt like a thread pulled tighter, connecting us in a way I couldn't untangle. And that's when the second twist entered, something I never saw coming. A few days later, my mom mentioned she would be traveling out of town for work. Just for a weekend, she said, leaving the two of us alone in the house. The second she told me, my stomach flipped. I tried to play it cool, nodding as though it didn't matter, but deep inside, I knew this was the test I wasn't ready for. The quiet evenings we'd shared before were intense enough with her only a room away. What would it be like with just the two of us and no buffer at all? The days leading up to her trip felt like a countdown. I caught him watching me in those small, stolen moments again, and I knew he felt it too. Neither of us said anything, but the unspoken tension grew heavier with every passing day. And though part of me feared it, another part of me couldn't help but wonder if this was where everything we'd been avoiding was meant to finally surface. When the weekend arrived, the house felt eerily quiet. No footsteps in the hall, no extra voice breaking the silence. It was just us. At first, we both seemed to avoid the obvious, keeping busy, filling the space with small talk, pretending it was just like any other day. But I could feel the weight of anticipation pressing harder with each hour. That night, the air outside was heavy with the sound of rain. I sat in my room listening to it against the window, the same way I had that first night when everything started. Then I heard it, the faint creak of footsteps in the hallway. My chest tightened instantly. My door opened slowly, just like before, and there he was again. For a moment, the past and present collided, pulling me back into that memory I couldn't escape. But this time, it was different. This time, he didn't just stand there in silence. His expression held something new, uncertainty mixed with a decision he hadn't yet spoken out loud. The look in his eyes was enough to tell me that whatever we had been holding back was no longer just in my imagination. Something was about to change, and neither of us could pretend otherwise. That was the twist I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about him watching anymore. It was about what he might finally do, and how I might finally respond. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the roof like a soundtrack to the moment I had been avoiding for so long. He stood there in my doorway, no words at first, just the weight of his presence filling the room. My heart raced as our eyes locked, and I knew the silence couldn't last. He finally stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. It felt like the world had shrunk down to just the two of us, trapped in a space too small to hold everything we had been carrying in silence. I braced myself for what he might say, for what might finally break the tension. His voice was low, almost hesitant, when he admitted he hadn't meant for any of this to happen, that watching me that night was never part of some plan. He said he couldn't explain why he lingered, only that something about me had changed the way he saw things. Hearing him say it out loud sent a chill through me. All the questions I had been replaying suddenly had answers, and those answers were both terrifying and strangely relieving. The conflict inside me reached its peak. Part of me wanted to run, to stop everything before it crossed a line we couldn't come back from. But another part of me couldn't ignore how much I had been waiting for this moment, how much I had already felt the same pull, but had been too afraid to admit it. It was as if everything we had left unsaid had finally crashed into reality, forcing us to make a choice. The climax came when he moved closer, his honesty still hanging in the air between us. For the first time, neither of us looked away. The truth of our feelings was undeniable, and in that instant, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. We had crossed the line, not with words, but with the weight of what we allowed ourselves to feel. It was overwhelming, intense, and strangely inevitable, as though it had been building all along. But just when I thought I knew where the night would lead, the twist came. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the moment like shattered glass. It was a message from my mom, an early return. Her work trip had been cut short, and she would be home before morning. The reality of what we were risking crashed down on us in an instant. The timing couldn't have been more cruel or more perfect, depending on how you looked at it. In that moment, everything shifted again. The intensity of what had just happened collided with the weight of what was about to happen. We had finally faced the truth, but the consequences were rushing toward us faster than either of us had prepared for. And that's where the story leaves its mark, not in the moment we gave in, but in the moment we realized the secret wasn't ours to keep forever. The sound of my mom's message changed everything. The moment that had felt like a secret world of its own came crashing down with the reality of her return. He stepped back almost instantly, as though the walls around us had shifted. The intensity of what we shared still hung in the air, but the urgency of the situation forced us to pull ourselves together. We both knew there was no turning back from what had just been revealed, but we also knew we couldn't ignore what was coming. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts swirled between what almost happened, what actually did happen, and what would happen when my mom walked through the door again. For so long, the tension between us had been unspoken. Now it was undeniable. We had admitted it without words, felt it without question. And yet, we were left with the hardest truth of all. Some feelings can't stay hidden forever, but they also can't always find a place to exist openly. When my mom returned early the next morning, everything felt strangely normal on the surface. She greeted us both like nothing had changed, but inside me, everything had. The way I looked at him was different now, and I could see in his eyes that he felt it too. There were no more denials, no more wondering if it was my imagination. We both knew. But we also both knew we had a choice, to either let it consume us or to step back before it destroyed more than just the two of us. In the days that followed, the tension softened. We didn't speak about it again, not directly. But our interactions carried a new kind of awareness, like a quiet agreement to respect the line we had almost crossed. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was cautious, careful, and strangely protective. We both knew what was there, but we also knew it wasn't something that could survive in the open. Looking back, I realized the story wasn't about what did or didn't happen between us. It was about the pull of unspoken feelings, the complexity of human connection, and the choices we make when faced with temptation. It was about realizing that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to hold back, even when every part of you wants to move forward. I'll leave you with this question. Do you think we made the right choice? Would you have wanted the story to end differently, or was this the only way it could have ended? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let me know if you'd want to see a sequel exploring what might happen if fate brought us back to that same crossroads again. Summary: this is the story of a complicated bond, a hidden tension that built between a young woman and her stepdad, starting with one unforgettable night and escalating toward a climax that tested both of them. It's about blurred boundaries, emotional suspense, and the choices that define us when we're caught between desire and responsibility.